A lot of people write lyrics essentially by improvising poetry or waiting for the muse or inspiration to gift them with the right line. And this is not how we should be writing lyrics. Let's talk about it. One reason to stop writing lyrics this way is it essentially brings on writer's block. When you think about what writer's block is at a foundational level, it's essentially our editor brain shutting down our writing brain until our writing brain eventually is just like, all right, well, no idea is good enough for you, editor brain, so I'll just come up with no ideas at all. When we put too much pressure on writing our lyrics by essentially demanding that we improvise poetry right from the beginning and then actually be good, essentially we're suffocating all of our ideas, because we might have a lot of really great ideas that could be rewritten, refined, or edited into really great lyrics. But we suffocate those ideas because they weren't brilliant the first time around. But we're never gonna find out if they could be refined into a really good lyric if we essentially shut down any and all ideas that aren't immediately obviously brilliant. This is very much like those people who are waiting for the perfect business idea or the perfect book idea. Oh, I'll finally write my book 30 years later when I come up with that one great idea. They're never freaking going to do it. You know it, I know it, and we are putting ourselves in a very similar position when we essentially demand that we improvise brilliant poetry as basically the core of our lyric writing process. When you're relying on inspiration, even if you do start out with no writer's block, it's highly likely that you'll end up writing yourself into a corner. Maybe a situation like you write the first verse and the chorus and the lyrics are just flowing and you are doing great. But then you get to the second verse and the bridge, and you're like, I don't really know what else to say. Crap, I don't have anything else to say because I already said everything I wanted to say with the first verse and the chorus, which might be a sign that maybe your first verse or your chorus is actually trying to cover too much ground. You need to go deeper instead of wider with what you're talking about. So instead of talking about so many different things with your first verse, you need to get deeper about talking about one thing. There's many reasons that this could happen, but you had no plan going in. So when you write yourself into a corner, it really shouldn't be surprising. It shouldn't be surprising when we reach a point of second verse hell where we're like, I don't know what to talk about because there's nothing left to say. Well, we didn't have a plan. We just relied on improvising poetry and we kind of got what was almost inevitable. Another reason we should stop writing lyrics in a way that we're just forcing ourselves to improvise brilliant poetry off the top of our head is the reality that writing is editing. So if you've never heard me talk about this before, this is essentially a line that I took from a composition professor back in college. But essentially what he meant by this is that we tend to overemphasize the importance of the writing process, the first draft, when really we should just write it, worry less about it, and understand that most of the quality of the writing is actually created in the editing process, not in the writing process. Because you can think of the writing process as essentially the first draft. That's when you write the essay, or you write the lyrics, or you write the book. Then you are editing it into something better than it originally was. The editing process is usually where the great quality comes from. Even if your first draft is pretty rough, it doesn't matter because that's what the editing process is for. But it seems to me that lyricists are often the one category of writer, when I say writer, I mean writer of words, that thinks they can bypass this process. No poet is out there like, oh yeah, I just improvise poetry on the first try and that's it, that's good. You can do that sometimes as an exercise, but your greatest poems are never going to just be written off the top of your head. And certainly, we don't even do that with books. And it's way easier to write prose off the top of your head. We speak in prose. We're used to talking in prose. And even that, novels usually have 4, 5, 6, 7 drafts where they are editing it into something much better. So certainly lyrics, which are way closer to poetry, which isn't prose, it's a harder thing to write. Certainly that is something that also could benefit a lot from the editing process. And editing is where your lyrics are going to go from something that maybe has some potential but isn't really that great into something really awesome. If you just try to bypass the editing process by sitting there until you think of a brilliant lyric, it probably isn't going to go very well and you're probably going to end up really frustrated. And in some circumstances, people end up thinking, oh, I'm dumb and I'm not talented and I suck at this and I shouldn't even try writing, when really that's not the issue at all. The issue is that you're trying to bypass the natural process of writing. And the natural process of writing is you write and then you edit. And usually the editing takes a lot longer than the initial writing. Another reason you should stop writing lyrics like this is essentially it moves inspiration from its rightful place as gasoline to what it really isn't supposed to be, which is the fire itself. Inspiration is the gasoline that goes on the fire, not the fire itself. This is maybe one of the most important things to understand as a creative person. A lot of times people think, if I'm not inspired, I shouldn't do any work. If I'm not inspired, I can't work on my song or my painting or my book. That is, of course, a giant lie. If you just wait for the inspiration to hit to write, then first of all, you're not going to write very much. And second of all, you are going to miss out on writing some great songs, because very often a great song had moments of inspiration that helped to accelerate the writing process or maybe make the song even better. But usually a lot of the writing process is actually something that is sort of agnostic to whether you're inspired or not. Relying on inspiration is not a good way to go. I can guarantee you your favorite songwriters and novelists and any type of creative person who is actually successful doesn't just sit around waiting for the muse and inspiration to actually do the work. Inspiration is great. That's why it's gasoline on the fire. It helps you to sometimes write better, and it certainly helps you very often to write faster. That's a great thing. But very often, ironically enough, you get inspired by actually doing the work when you're not inspired. Because many times, you might not even know when inspiration was going to hit. You were too busy watching The Office again. But if you were writing, you would have become inspired. So sitting around and waiting for inspiration is not the way to go. That's not the role inspiration should play, as this be-all, end-all that we absolutely must have to do anything creative. No. Instead, it is a great gasoline on the fire. We should appreciate it when it comes. It's amazing when it comes. It's great to be inspired. We all want to be inspired. But we have to do the work whether we're inspired or not. And we're going to end up being inspired more when we actually put in the work. So the rightful place for inspiration is the gasoline, not the fire itself. So when we ask ourselves to essentially improvise brilliant poetry, we are putting all the pressure on whether or not we are inspired in that moment. Because if we're inspired, then yeah, maybe the lyrics will be good the first time. But if we're not inspired, or if we have one inspired line and kind of all the rest wasn't really that inspired, which is pretty realistic, that's usually how it goes. It's pretty rare that you're inspired enough that you can just write a whole bunch of lyrics and they're all amazing the first time. That will happen, but that's the exception, not the rule. That's why editing exists. And by the way, even if you are inspired while writing lyrics, a lot of times still editing will help them be even better. But I digress. When we put all the pressure on writing lyrics right the first time, we are essentially putting all our eggs in the inspiration basket. If we're inspired, maybe they'll end up being good lyrics. If we're not inspired or not completely inspired, then our lyrics are gonna suck, because we're not going to edit them into something better. We just said, well, that's what I came up with in the moment. Okay, that's fine to do, but it probably means that the vast majority of our lyrics are not going to be very good because we relied on the muse, we relied on inspiration, when it should be the gasoline, not the fire itself. So we've talked about what not to do when it comes to lyric writing. What should we do instead? And I think the first step is to understand that the first step of lyric writing is not actually writing lyrics. There should be a whole development process before you actually try to start writing lyrics. And before you say I'm crazy, let's quickly think about what authors and movie makers often do. When it comes to movie making, there's a development process that happens before they ever shoot a single scene. In fact, a lot of movies go through the development process and then never even end up getting made. When it comes to writing books, very often the author does not start by just starting to write the book. Instead, they come up with an outline and have an idea of what the plot is going to be, and they flesh out their characters. They might even answer crazy questions about, like, this character, what would their favorite book be? Just to flesh out who are their characters really. They still do these sorts of things before they start writing. So of course, as lyric writers, we could benefit from doing the same thing, especially since writing lyrics is something that isn't exactly trivial. So what does this development process look like when it comes to lyrics? I think the most important thing to do is to just write prose first. Before we try to even worry about rhythm and meter and rhyme, before any of that, just write in prose. Very often what I'll do is at least a whole page of just writing prose that is essentially doing a journal entry from the main character's point of view, where I'm not worried at all about anything. I'm just writing as if I were journaling 5 minutes at night before bed or something, where essentially any idea is fair game. I'm not editing at all, I'm just writing. Ideas are coming out, most of them suck, and that's okay. And it's really easy to know that that's okay, because I'm not even writing lyrics, I'm literally writing prose. Something else to do is to go look up some art that you find inspiring that's related to your song. Maybe it's a painting that utilizes a similar image that you are utilizing in your song. Or it's a piece of art that just has a very similar vibe to the vibe of your song. Maybe the vibe of it, or just the feeling it evokes in you, is similar to the feeling you want your song to have. There's many different ways to do this, but go find those pieces of art or photographs or whatever on Google Images and save them to a document where you are doing this development process. So you have pictures, some prose writing, and you can go find a bunch of different words that sort of evoke some of the central imageries of your song. For instance, let's say you have a song that is about the ocean and the beach, and that's sort of the setting of the song. In your lyrics, you might be tempted to talk about walking down the sidewalk. But if you did this exercise first, you may have written down the word boardwalk as a word that is related to words like ocean and beach, because a boardwalk is something that generally you would only see on the ocean or the beach. So it might actually make sense in a song where the imagery is sort of all revolving around the ocean to actually use the word boardwalk instead of sidewalk, which is something that you might not come up with if you didn't go into the lyric writing process with a long list of words that sort of evoke the imagery of the setting of your song or one of the central images of your song. Another important element of our songwriting process really needs to be to write with the intent to rewrite and edit. This does a lot of different things for us. First of all, it relieves the pressure when we do write lyrics. We understand that the first draft of our lyrics might actually have no lines that make the final cut. It might not even have an idea that makes the final cut, and that is totally okay. It's okay to write a first draft and say, that was all terrible, and then to write a totally new draft, and then to take that draft and take the central ideas, maybe the sort of outline of it, and then you just rewrite the whole thing. You find a different way to word everything. And then you actually edit the lyrics, which can look like a lot of different things, but just as an example, you might take one word, maybe it's a verb that you think, this is a lame verb, and I'm gonna go to thesaurus.com and try to figure out a better word that is more evocative than the word that I currently have. It's just a word that really brings more images to mind and is just a more vivid word, because usually in lyrics we want vivid words, not boring words. And this is where it's gonna be really important to have a really great lyric editing process. And if you want more on the 6 steps that I personally go through when writing lyrics, be sure to check out my free lyric checklist. It breaks down lyric writing into 6 steps. I have several steps before lyric writing, as you can probably imagine from this video, and there are some steps after lyric writing that help to really refine it into something great, because as I mentioned, writing is editing, so of course editing is an important part and an important step in this process. So be sure to check that out, my free gift to you, songwritertheory.com/lyric checklist. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. I'll talk to you in the next one.